Welcome back to Transcriber from Reddit. Today's topic comes from the subreddit exLutheran, posted by user BitterElevator1067. The post is a linked post titled, "They took part in Apache ceremonies. Their schools expelled them for satanic activities." It was cross-posted from r/atheism at the time of this recording 2 days ago, with the same title as the post in r/atheism. This is an article that is linked in The Guardian. As of recording, this has 20 upvotes and 19 comments. I want to highlight what OP commented under their their cross post. They said, "Looks like a WELS church and school." Linked here is the www.eastforklutheranschool.org/r/churches. User Lost in Non-Thought responds to OP's comment saying, "The WELS is petrified of any outside influences." I am highlighting this article today because this took place in the last couple of years, and it is horrific to see the abuses the WELS takes part in against people they are supposed to be ministering to. Before I go through and read the Guardian article, I want to highlight this link that OP shared in the comment section. This is the eastforklutheranschool.org link. Here we see highlighted at the bottom, on the left side, WELS, Christ's love, our calling, along with the WELS logo, and on the right hand side, Native Christians with a specifically native-oriented cross next to it. Above the two logos, on the left, starting there, we see East Fork Lutheran School is part of the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod. Specifically, East Fork Lutheran School exists to serve the Apache people and aid in WELS mission work to the Apache people. Below that are links for click here to learn more about the WELS, and another link for click here to learn more about the Apache mission. On the right-hand side, we see the text that says, "WELS churches serving the White Mountain Apache tribe." East Fork Lutheran Church, linked here. Open Bible Lutheran Church, linked here. Canyon Day Lutheran Church, linked here. Shepherd of the Mountain Lutheran Church, linked here. Shepherd in the Pines Lutheran Church, linked here. Gethsemane Lutheran Church, linked here. As of recording this, I want to stress that a previous video I did on Adam Wickman, who was transferred to Arizona Lutheran Academy from Minnesota after there was, I'm going to say, some hot water that Minnesota high school came under his mishandling of a rape allegation from a student. Adam Wickman, as far as I know, is not directly working for any of these churches or schools. He is just at the Arizona Lutheran Academy. I could be wrong. If you have anything where it seems like Adam Wickman crosses over into this pool, please reach out to me and I'd be more than happy to fix this. Now, moving on to the Guardian article. The article is titled, "They took part in Apache ceremonies. Their schools expelled them for satanic activities." Underneath the title it reads, "Educators on the Fort Apache Reservation have repeatedly condemned teens for participating in a sacred dance. It follows a pattern of Christian discipline begun more than a century ago." Below that reads a caption to the photo that's displayed on the right-hand side of this article, where it says Nicole Ackerin with photographs by Trevor Christensen. On the right, we see an Apache family displaying at least two of their daughters and potentially the mother that's behind the two daughters in full Apache regalia. They appear to be looking to get ready for a dance. I myself don't know that much about Apache culture, so if I'm missing something here, please correct me in the comments below. All in all, this picture looks like a beautiful representation of their heritage, which begs the question, why would the WELS school crack down so hard on it? I begin reading the article. The way the school saw it, it was devil worship. In October 2019, 3 teenage girls were punished for participating in a spiritual ceremony. Their Arizona school expelled 2 of them and let the third off with a warning, citing their attendance as a violation of school policy and grounds for expulsion. Caitlin, now 18, says she and her friends were disciplined for participating in a sunrise dance, a traditional native ceremony at the core of White Mountain Apache culture. The Monday after the dance, Caitlin's parents told her to stay home that day. They had received a call from East Fork Lutheran School telling them not to send their daughter in. She didn't know why. Then, around noon, her mom got another phone call. The principal wanted to meet with Caitlin, her parents, and the local preacher. The principal and preacher also invited the 2 other girls and their families to their own private meetings with school leadership. At the start of each meeting, the families were chastised for participating in the dance. Caitlin remembers her mother telling the principal and preacher how hypocritical they were to say the Apache people were not praying to God. Quote, "In the Bible, God himself says to come to me in all sorts," end quote, she argued. Quote, "The dance is also a prayer. It's another way," end quote. The leadership of the school on the Fort Apache Reservation disagreed with that interpretation and used pictures of the event posted on Facebook as evidence for their expulsions. The other 2 girls were immediately given letters of expulsion. Caitlin was just given a warning. Quote, "I knew that I was already one of the principal's favorites," end quote, she says. Quote, "I think they just gave me a second chance, but they gave me a strong warning not to have a dance," end quote. Side note, this is just personal speculation, but as we've seen with other videos about misconduct of the WELS on this channel, usually if girls become principals' favorites, that's because the principals or other teachers in positions of power and authority over the girls are preparing to groom them or have started grooming them. Again, that is just personal speculation. Below that is a photo of multiple buildings in a desert area. And below the photo, it reads, "The East Fork Lutheran School at the Fort Apache Reservation in Arizona." I continue reading the article. For the first 12 years of her life, Caitlin looked forward to having her own dance, a sacred coming-of-age experience celebrating the transition from girlhood to womanhood. It's a great financial sacrifice for the family. Over 4 days, a girls' community prays for her. They offer her gifts and witness her as she participates in rituals symbolizing her maturity and growth. A medicine man presides over the event, praying and singing with holy members of the community called crown dancers, who recite the creation story to the audience. The idea meant the world to Caitlin, but she didn't have her own sunrise dance. If she were found out, she would be expelled from school immediately, a stain on her permanent record that could affect her college opportunities. At the time, her private school's teachers were mostly white people who would often discuss the satanic nature of Apache traditions. When Caitlin was in 5th grade, she was given an F on an art project for drawing the White Mountain Apache crest and including an eagle feather. An A student, she was devastated to be chastised this way. As Caitlin remembers it, her teacher smiled and explained that this kind of project wasn't allowed because it denoted, quote, pagan worship, end quote. Her father was furious, but the family couldn't do anything about it. It was what the girl and her family expected from the white people who worked it on the reservation. But these expulsions felt different. Watching other girls get publicly exiled from their school community meant that fear soon took root, cracking the foundation of Apache pride her family had worked to build beneath her. Caitlin finished her 8th grade year at East Fork Lutheran School and then moved on to a school off the reservation, but the damage was done. For the next 4 years, Caitlin struggled to integrate into her Apache culture. She explained, quote, I didn't allow myself to engage or talk about my culture, end quote. She says, quote, even after I graduated, I had that paranoia that I would get in trouble for talking about or participating in it, end quote. Below that is a photo where it displays a church signpost for East Fork Lutheran Schools next to a stone erected that says East Fork Mission in a sign that's attached to it. Below the photo reads, Caitlin finished her 8th grade year at East Fork Lutheran School and then moved on to a school off the reservation. I continue reading the article. 3.5 years after the expulsions, in early 2023, 9 women gathered in the front room of a small house on the Fort Apache Indian Reservation to talk about this pattern of expulsions. In the middle of the room, 2 recording devices lay on opposite ends of the table. Abby, an older White Mountain Apache woman with her hair in a loose bun, hosted the evening. She sat down next to the black cast iron stove, which had been lit hours before to keep the room warm, and texted her sisters Millie and Althea, who were coming. Various women walked through her front door. Some were family members, others acquaintances. 9 women gathered to finally talk about what kept happening at East Fork Lutheran School. Althea, the oldest of the sisters, spoke first. 2 of her granddaughters were expelled from school in 2018 and 2019. She still has one of the school's letters tucked away in a box in her house. It states that these 13-year-old girls will only be allowed to return to school if they agree to confess in front of the WELS church, school, and community that they were worshiping the devil when they took part in the sunrise dance. They must promise never to do it again. Maria, a younger woman in her late 30s, was there to share a similar story. The school board found that she had also participated in what they considered a satanic ceremony. Her children were not allowed to return to school the next year. The school had decided to penalize the children for the perceived sins of their mother. Side note, that is not uncommon in the WELS, because what the WELS will do, especially if there's only a mother involved and no father involved, they will punish children for what they perceive to be the failings of the mother. Children are not sacred to them. I continue reading. Astonishingly, this pattern of Christian discipline started more than a century ago had never stopped. Section, a, quote, demonic manifestation, end quote. The Fort Apache Reservation in Arizona spans 2,625 square miles, just a little larger than the state of Delaware, but with a population just over 14,600. Based on our reporting and speaking with members of the tribe, there are over 80 churches on the reservation, representing 27 different Christian denominations. The tribe indicated that there was an official list of the churches operating on the reservation, but no list has been delivered. Side note, I would be really interested in seeing this list. I continue reading. East Fork Lutheran School was founded in 1951 by the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod, parentheses, WELS, and parentheses, a religious group which has been active in Arizona since 1893 as part of its Apache mission, linked here, an effort to convert, quote, unreached tribes, end quote, to Christianity. This was one of many schools built on the reservation by WELS. The mission has shifted to now being focused on training Native American Christians to lead in the ministry and serve as missionaries to other indigenous nations throughout the U.S. and Canada. Below that is a picture, what appears to be a white brick chapel, and below the picture reads, the St. Francis of Assisi Church at the Fort Apache Reservation. I continue reading. The school is not unique in its dogma opposing traditional indigenous practices. The vast majority of the churches on Apache land teach families who participate in traditional ceremonies that they're damning themselves by worshiping the devil. The White River Assembly of God, a Pentecostal church, stated in its missionary handbook that crown dancers, those who help welcome the girl into womanhood during the sunrise dance, could be a, quote, demonic manifestation, end quote. Since 2020, WELS has published 180 sermons on its YouTube channel, Native Christians. 31 of the 190 videos, almost a fifth, include disparaging remarks about tribal practices, including the sunrise dance or medicine men, including 2 completely dedicated to convincing the congregation of the evil within the sunrise dance. Only 2 Christian denominations operating on the reservation told me they do not include anti-traditional Apache rhetoric in their sermons and ideology: the Catholic Church and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon Church. Families on the reservation commonly have a similar understanding. The influence of this religious teaching throughout the community affects the tribal government as well. Less than half of the 11-person White Mountain Apache Tribal Council participates in Apache ceremonies, according to the council member Annette Tenegith. She believes 7 council people do not participate in sunrise dances or support the work of medicine men. Apache families who send their children to East Fork Lutheran School face a complicated choice. Some families do so because students in Christian schools are seen as more successful than those attending the Bureau of Indian Affairs, parentheses, BIA, and parentheses, schools down the road. Others simply value a Christian education and feel that their children might get on the, quote, right path, end quote, with that background. Still, many families have their children participate in Native ceremonies, ignoring the school's racist policies. They just hope they do not get found out by the teachers. Side note, I think a better phrase than racist policies would be their lack of inclusion of another religion, and that could probably fall under a violation of the First Amendment. But I'm not a lawyer, I'm just approaching this from what I think is a better angle. Yes, there's racism involved, but it's more than that. They're using their religion to justify hatred of another religion. Section, quote, Mom, did you know you are worshiping false idols? End quote. Quote, one would think that a story like this would be out of 1890, not 2024, end quote. When I talked to Dr. Robert P. Jones, the president and founder of the Public Religion Research Institute, linked here, parentheses, PRRI, and parentheses, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, he was dismayed that churches still teach against indigenous tradition. Quote, it is worth noting that the posture being described comes from this conviction that European Christianity is the pinnacle of human civilization, end quote, he said. Quote, and anything other than that is inferior and worse religiously because it can lead you to eternal damnation, end quote. The sunrise dance is a celebration of puberty endowing girls with blessings from God and their community. It is one of the few Apache rituals that has survived the indigenous genocide that resulted in the death of as many as 15 million Native Americans over the last 500 years. Side note, I'm going to repeat that again. That's as many as 15 million Native American deaths over the last 500 years. I continue reading. The dance is sacred both because of its origin and the spiritual impact it has on a girl's life. Bruce Burnett, a White Mountain Apache medicine man, a spiritual leader endowed with the traditional knowledge of healing, oversees these dances. Burnett explained, quote, "It's about the girl. The sunrise dance is not for today, not for tomorrow. It is fixing the room for her, fixing the road to success. The reason why it is so important is that a woman has got to be strong to move on the path to what she is going to become," unquote. According to Burnett, the dance came in a vision to an early medicine man. The ceremony has remained the same through the generations. Quote, "The prayer that is put down for her is that it would be easy for her, that it would be comfortable for her in whatever she wants, to do, unquote, Burnett said. Quote, "If she wants to go to military life, school, or look to find a job, everything will be there to be successful. That is the prayer that is put down," unquote. Side note, this is a beautiful tradition. It has a beautiful and rich history, and I hope that these Apache can stay strong and continue to practice this tradition. It shames me that as part of the West and as a recovering exLutheran, that the cultures that I've been in have nothing similar to this. But of course, they don't want women to have autonomy, especially in the WELS. As for secular culture, well, it's both to denigrate you and sexualize you and act as if everything you do matters, and then simultaneously as if nothing you do matters. I truly wish that we had a culture like this and a ceremony like this. I continue reading. Maria's crime, as the school saw it, was that she sponsored a sunrise dance. Never mind that it took place on the weekend and off school grounds. In doing so, she helped welcome a friend's daughter into adulthood and created a familial bond for the rest of her life, which is a huge honor. But just before the school year started, she received an email telling her that her children were not allowed to return. Maria had sent her children to East Fork because she hoped a Christian education would harmoniously supplement the foundation of their indigenous heritage and identity. She now realized that East Fork was extreme in its anti-traditionalism. She was devastated. During our interview, she cried as she explained the shame her daughters felt at not being allowed to go back to school. They were also nervous about being sent to the Bureau of Indian Affairs school, where the classes were bigger and they didn't know anyone. Just last year, the youngest of her 3 children attending the school came home from East Fork and asked, quote, "Mom, did you know that when you go to sunrise dances, you are worshiping false idols?" Unquote. Maria was shocked. Quote, "Who told you that?" Unquote, she asked. Quote, "My teacher. She said watching the crown dancers is worshiping Satan." Unquote. To hear this, and for her daughters to be told such insulting falsehoods, was mind-blowing. Quote, "Our ceremonies are what we were blessed with, our language, our everything." Unquote. Maria said, quote, "Those are the things we were blessed with to be Apache people. So I try to explain it to them in a way where they understand. No, we're not doing anything bad here. We're not." End quote. Maria described feeling powerless, like she was hitting a wall in speaking to church leaders. Parentheses. The Guardian received no answer from WELS after asking about Maria's experience. End parentheses. Side note, The Guardian and other interested news organizations will likely never receive a complete answer from the WELS regarding this, because this is negative press, and the WELS does not like responding to negative press, let alone giving clarification as to what they actually mean.
If they want more information, my recommendation to them is to reach out to the exLutheran subreddit. I continue reading. All the while, her kids were waiting in uncertainty about the nature of their cultural identities. Were they evil if they participated in ceremonies, or was it permitted? Who was right? Quote, I felt like the longer I kept them at the school, the more confused they were, unquote, Maria said. Still, she hoped to keep them there because the classroom setting was good. The student-to-teacher ratio was small. They received guaranteed attention by their teachers and a thorough education. When it came time for registration, Maria did not receive any notification from the school. It finally notified her 2 weeks before the school year started that her children would not be invited back. She had to move them to the public school. Quote, now that they're in a public school and they've adjusted to it, they are more proud of their traditions or culture. They are more proud of who they are, end quote, she said. A WELS spokesperson responded to requests for comment by saying, quote, WELS churches serve people by proclaiming the entirety of God's message to us as presented in the Bible. Apache members, teachers, and pastors have been faithful leaders as our WELS churches strive to present God's truth among communities with their own valued religious practices. WELS has had a trusted partnership with members of the White Mountain Apache tribe in sharing the message of the Bible dating back to 1893, end quote. Side note, also not surprising considering that the WELS really wants to pretend like nothing bad is happening and like they're not responsible for some really, really bad ideas and bad practices. I continue reading. Maria and her family no longer attend church. Though they are still devoted Christians, they're not comfortable in that space. Quote, rather than giving a lecture about the Bible, the preachers bring it back to culture. Quote, you're not supposed to be doing this. You're not supposed to be doing that. End quote. And overall quote, she explained. Even the programs handed out at the beginning of the service have an unwelcome message written on the front. It states that if you have participated in a sunrise dance, you cannot take communion. Side note, I'm going to repeat that again. The programs handed out by the WELS state, if you have participated in a sunrise dance, you cannot take communion. The WELS is willing to withhold the assurance of forgiveness and salvation that is supposed to be present in communion and is willing to withhold that from anyone who has participated in a sunrise dance. And I'm willing to suspect that they're also willing to withhold communion from anyone they personally suspect has taken or participated in a sunrise dance. I continue reading. Section, quote, kill the Indian in him and save the man, end quote. In August 2022, the Oglala Lakota Nation in South Dakota voted to kick out a missionary from the Pine Ridge Reservation who was distributing anti-traditional proselytizing materials. The nation now requires all missionaries and religious groups to register and go through a background investigation before entering the reservation and working. No indigenous nations in Arizona have publicly enacted these same regulations for a myriad of reasons, one being the short-term welfare perks of having religious groups freely operating on the reservation. Religious groups bring in donations, food, and clothes to a population impoverished by crippling racist policies and the psychological legacy of genocide and spiritual abuse. The price for these benefits can include being forced to let go of tradition and indigeneity. Tenajith, the council member, explained that the White Mountain Apache tribe is caught in a difficult position when it comes to expelling WELS from East Fork. Quote, we can take that land back if we want to, but nobody has brought it up because there is a school there, end quote, she explained. Quote, even though they are twisting the children's minds, it is still a better school than others. We need to stand strong.
Keep your language strong. Teach your children how to speak Apache. That, side note, ... Seems like there might have been some stuff that was excerpted out of an original interview, but I continue reading what was included in this piece. That's the reason why we're a sovereign nation, end quote. Below that is a black and white and gray picture. Below the picture is the caption that reads, Christopher Columbus frightens the Carib people, I believe it means short for Caribbean people, into assisting him by predicting an eclipse of the moon in Jamaica in 1504. In the picture itself, we see in the central section of the picture a tall white man dressed in what appears to be a mix of some colonial and some traditional or native garb, but he's pointing towards what is up in the sky, the upper left corner of the picture. The eclipse happening, where the moon passes in front of the sun, as we now know it today. Surrounding Christopher Columbus are natives in differing displays of distress. And in the right-hand section of the picture, we see a big, large tree. And just past the tree, we see the shadows of 3 unnamed guards. I continue reading. There is a straight line between the beliefs that underwrote Christopher Columbus's claims to the Americas and the current attitudes of religious leaders on the reservation. Columbus modeled the essence of the 1493 papal decree, the doctrine of discovery, which consecrated any, quote, new, end quote, territory not yet inhabited by Christians for the Christian world. When Columbus landed in the Americas, he claimed it for both Catholicism and Spain, officially intertwining religion with real estate. In 1845, the doctrine of discovery was reminted for the country's largely Protestant population as the doctrine of manifest destiny, the spiritual right for new Americans to expand westward and claim all territory in the name of, quote, progress, end quote. Year after year, new policies were drafted to ensure that the indigenous nations already living westward would help keep pioneers who chose to cross the Mississippi River safe. Treaties were signed under the illusion that the U.S. government would honor land rights and cultural identity. But in 1883, the Office of Indian Affairs within the Department of Interior established the Code of Indian Offenses, making it illegal to participate in traditional ceremonies. It wasn't until 1978, with the passing of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, that participating in the sunrise dance was decriminalized. The establishment of the Office of Indian Affairs paved the way for the 1887 Dawes Act, which divided tribal lands into allotments and included a provision that entitled religious organizations that worked with indigenous people to keep up to 160 acres of federal land to support their missions. To this day, these churches still draw from the spiritual legacies of Christian missions and receive funding from off-reservation congregations under that definition. Global Ministries of the United Methodist Church spent over $11 million in 2022 for missionary services. WELS spent $661,018 just for the Apache missions, and over $23.5 million for all missions, as laid out in its most recent report from 2023. WELS first came to Arizona in 1892, 5 years after the Dawes Act. When it was clear that exterminating the Apache people would not be possible, the federal government engaged Christian denominations working with the military to force the assimilation of the indigenous people.
R.H. Pratt, the superintendent of the first, quote, industrial, end quote, boarding school under this policy, coined the term that embodied the philosophy behind these institutions. Quote, kill the Indian in him and save the man, end quote. Also linked here. Below that, we see a recent photograph of the inside of a church. The caption underneath the photograph reads, the St. Francis of Assisi Church. This photograph is a sidelong view, viewing multiple pews within this church. The backdrop has tan walls with a stark contrast to the underside of the walls being a turquoise. And there appears to be some Native American tribal pieces here, artwork and otherwise. But otherwise, there's no location given for it, so I cannot definitively say that this would be an Apache church that was set by St. Francis of Assisi and their cohorts. I continue reading. Federal boarding school policy allowed the military to forcibly remove Apache children from their families and send them to industrial schools in an attempt to militarize and alter their identities. They were forbidden to practice their religion or speak their language, and reports of physical and sexual abuse were common. Many children never returned home. If an indigenous child was found outside during school hours, indigenous police were appointed to snatch the child and deliver them to a school under the U.S. military's jurisdiction. If a parent sought to hide their child, they could be imprisoned or cut off from food and other necessary daily supplies. Apache children were kidnapped and taken as far as Pennsylvania, where they were forced to fully assimilate into Anglo-Christian society. Their clothes were burned, their language forgotten. Many children died of disease, neglect, or abuse. And while the number of deaths is not yet known, it is believed that Apache children comprise a quarter of the graves at Carlisle Indian Industrial School, linked here. To think that 1800s attitudes towards Apache children have changed would be a mistake. Outside of the WELS mission, volunteers of other denominations drive around in colorful buses and still pick children up throughout the reservation, linked here, whether on the side of the road or other public areas. They take them to play games and learn about their version of Jesus and then drop the kids off again where they found them hours before. Parents are not always told or asked permission. Side note, that is very ironic considering how much evangelical parents want to know everything that their kids are doing or want to have permission before their kids are involved in anything. I continue reading. Ministry members post on social media about the good they are doing by, quote, being the hands and feet of Jesus to some of the most vulnerable kids in our nation, end quote. They then post pictures. Side note, linked here is a link for some of the pictures that they're talking about. I continue reading. Of themselves surrounded by garbage, validating their projection of vulnerability on these families. Referring to how white missionaries target communities of color and paint their converts as impoverished victims in need of Christianity, Jones, the Public Religion Research Institute founder, said, quote, I'll put it as bluntly as I can. I think it's because most white Christian denominations in this country have hardly begun to reckon with how white supremacy has become deeply embedded in our faith. So we perpetuate it, sometimes consciously but often unconsciously, end quote. He continued, quote, if you happen to be a Christian and of European extraction in some way, it's a pretty powerful drug to think that your race and your religion were chosen by God and represent the pinnacle of human achievement. There's power in asserting that vision, and at the end of the day, it's about power. While we are beginning to see serious efforts to try to disentangle white supremacy from Christianity, that legacy still haunts us, end quote. As recently as 2022, The WELS leadership published an article linked here, directly translating the words of an early pastor from German to English, detailing how Hitler's regime united Lutheranism in Germany, although it does describe misgivings about how Hitler handled the rest of the country. This article was featured, again linked here, in the quarterly magazine sent to all of their congregation members throughout the country. Side note, I will be transcribing that article later in a separate video. This, however, deserves its own video. Section, quote, "That's a stupid question. That is a white person question," end quote. Millie's husband, Ramon Riley, the Apache Cultural Resource Director at the White Mountain Apache Culture Center and Museum, attends the Catholic Church and remains devoted to the traditions and rituals of his Apache identity. I asked him how he reconciles his Christian faith with the history of violence upon the Apache people in the name of Jesus Christ. He took a beat, quote, "That's a stupid question. That is a white person question," end quote. Below that is a photograph of a Native man wearing modern garb. Underneath it is a caption, "Ramon Riley in his office at the White Mountain Apache Cultural Center and Museum." The man is surrounded by desks, a computer, and multiple books and papers. Giving a huge amount of evidence to the amount of traditions that he probably has stored in that office, which is incredible to think about. I continue reading. His response, when pressed, encapsulates the huge gap in understanding about the religious binary white people operate in and the spiritual life Riley identifies with. He added, quote, "Our elders went through historical trauma the way they were treated by the Spanish soldiers, Mexican soldiers, and white people, and all of their churches and military. This trauma still affects us to this day," end quote. Riley is also baptized Catholic and attends Mass every now and then, but regularly participates in ceremonial activities like the sweat, where he ultimately finds peace from the trauma. He said, quote, "I don't mind practicing both because the Catholic and the Apache God are identical in a way," end quote. In fact, the Catholic Church has repeatedly apologized for their past wrongdoing. In 1987, Pope John Paul II came to Arizona, linked here, and made it clear that ceremony and tradition were not a threat to Catholicism. And in March 2023, Pope Francis repudiated the doctrine of discovery. On a 2022 tour of atonement in Canada, linked here, he said, quote, "Never again can the Christian community allow itself to be infected by the idea that one culture is superior to others, or that it is legitimate to employ ways of coercing others," end quote. When asked the same question about the relationship between native traditional religion and Christianity, Tenji's answer is similar, quote, "God hears our prayers. Who are we praying to? We are praying to the same God as they're praying to. White people cannot judge us, you know? Only God can judge us," end quote. She explained that Christianity and traditional religion are the same. Both worship the same God. She will defend her Christian beliefs as hard as she will defend her right to the protection of the sunrise dance. Dr. Greg Johnson, professor of religious studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, notes that many Christian traditions tout an all-or-nothing viewpoint. Quote, time and again, Native peoples have said, quote, "You know what? We will re-engineer your Christianity to better suit our purposes. So even if you tell us it's exclusive, even if you discipline us in a way, cut our hair, dress us, make us feel a certain way, we're not done being Apache, and we will make your Christianity do things you didn't expect," end quote, and overall quote. Below that is an image of a white man standing at the center front of a church, between the front three pews and standing in front of the altar. Below that image reads the caption, Father John Cormack, quote, "We encounter God in many, many ways," end quote. I continue reading. The morning of Good Friday, Father John Cormack, presiding priest of St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church in Fort Apache, agreed to an interview in his office. His ministry, a rarity on the reservation, is an example of the weaving of Apache tradition into Christianity. The chapel is decorated in Apache symbols and sacred tools. When he collects written prayers, Father John uses Apache traditional burden baskets, canes, and other ceremonial objects. Above the door are eagle feathers, a sacred symbol of strength. He's known to attend sunrise dances and offer a prayer at the ceremony when invited to do so. Quote, "We encounter God in many, many ways, and each other in all these beautiful traditions," end quote, he said. Father John, who came from Castlebar in Ireland, took on this role right before the pandemic hit. He grew emotional as we spoke, pausing throughout the conversation to consider the parallel of the British Empire's impact on Ireland and the U.S. occupying the land of indigenous nations. The land of the indigenous nations. He cried over the shared injustice of his people and also the people he was serving. He cried over the sins of the past and present committed in the name of Christ. Quote, "We have to always look for justice." Gandhi, in another country under British rule, said, quote, "If it weren't for Christians, I'd be a Christian," end quote. It's difficult to talk about, but no matter what, you should always seek justice for all of us. That is what Christ did, end quote. Parentheses. Gandhi was quoted as saying, quote, "I like your Christ, but not your Christianity," end quote. Linked here, end parentheses. WELS went as far as banning Millie from participating in communion because she sponsored a sunrise dance. The Guardian reached out to each of the 6 WELS pastors preaching in the White Mountain Apache and San Carlos Apache reservations separately to discuss their beliefs surrounding the sunrise dance, and received no response. Millie, Althea, and Abby have spoken to their WELS pastor to ask why the church is becoming more determined in its anti-indigenous ideology. In the past, the preachers did not actively scout out those who participated in Apache traditions and then cut them off from church services. They have received no substantial response. Private schools operate as they choose, and there are no legal precedents, nor federal laws or policies which could be used to protect Indigenous beliefs in this context. Even in public schools, Indigenous students and communities are still fighting in court, linked here, to be allowed to wear traditional tribal regalia, traditional hairstyles, or tribal clothing, especially during high school graduation ceremonies. Section, quote, "We still have to use the white man's weapon to keep what is rightfully ours," end quote. Below that is an image of a Native woman dressed in modern attire sitting atop a rocky mount or outcropping somewhere. And I say somewhere in Arizona because below that is the caption that reads, "Nailin' Pike at Oak Flat in Arizona." When Nailin Pike of the Chiricahua Apache Nation was just 14 years old, she moved from Mesa, Arizona, back to the San Carlos Apache Reservation. A few weeks in, a school friend pressured her to convert to Lutheranism, making her question whether she would go to hell if she did not convert and give up her traditional ways. Pike, now 24, was shocked. As a young woman with an ancestry of activists and community leaders, Nailin knew that to better serve her people, she needed to understand what these missions were teaching them. Once she started college, she decided to take catechism lessons to better understand what her community was taught. She went to college in Mesa, 3 hours from the reservation, and drove back to the reservation on weekends to attend classes. Quote, I would go to church sometimes to see what it was like. The one thing I remember is one of the pastors had told the congregation, quote, "It's okay if you wear your camp dress, but it's when you believe in it, parentheses, as a spiritual or cultural act, end parentheses, you shouldn't wear it. It's okay to eat your fry bread, but it's when you believe in eating the fry bread that you shouldn't eat it." End quote. End overall quote, she said. Naylin was devastated. Following a visit to the church, she got in her car to make her way back to Mesa Community College, but made one sacred stop at Oak Flat, a swath of land in the Tonto National Forest of utmost sanctity. It is believed to be the largest copper deposit in North America, and the federal government wants to transfer it to Resolution Copper, a mining project owned by the mining companies Rio Tinto and BHP. That day, Naylin walked towards the mesa and, through her sadness and heartbreak, she prayed for her people. Quote, "There's so many missionaries or organizations that come in thinking that they can, parentheses, teach the Apache people that living in their culture is wrong, end parentheses, because now we're the shadow in this country. We're the dust underneath the carpet. We're the people that are never seen, even though we're the first people. There's this whole idea that we're people of the past. We're not people of the present or the future," end quote. On March 1st, 2024, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled 6-5 in favor of Resolution Copper. The decision is expected to be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court in the upcoming months. The court's decision will be largely dependent on the interpretation of the 1852 Treaty of Santa Fe and was signed by representatives of the U.S. government and various Apache leaders, including Chief Mangus Coloradas. Below that is an image that is the same as the image at the beginning of the article. Below the image is the caption that reads, "Michelle and Chester Colole with their family." Michelle is descended from Chief Mangus Coloradas, while Chester is descended from Chief Alchese. More than 170 years later, Mangus Coloradas's direct descendant, Michelle Colole, sits at a table with 3 of her 4 daughters and her husband, Chester, a descendant of another great chief, Chief Alchese. Quote, "We're still fighting," she said. Quote, "We still have to use the white man's weapon to keep what is rightfully ours, so we are fighting in court. What are they going to do with it? It doesn't have any meaning to them except monetary. They wouldn't allow us to go into their homes and take whatever we wanted, so why would they do the same to us? In many different ways. It is hurtful. It is frustrating," end quote. When the Colole's first daughter was 6 or 7 years old, she asked her parents if it was true what she was learning at the WELS church, that participating in traditional ceremonies was tied to the devil. After that Sunday, they never went back to the WELS church. Quote, "We tell our stories to our kids. We want them to feel it, see it, live it, and be part of it," end quote, Chester said. Quote, "When the Spirit gets to you, you can either be at the river, on top of the mountain, praying in front of your house, inside a church. It could be at a sunrise ceremony. Wherever the Spirit catches you is where you belong. That's where God is at. God is not just in church. God is everywhere," end quote. Through it all, the Colole family said, quote, "We're still here," end quote. Quote, "We're still surviving, and we are always Apache first," end quote. This ends the article. As always, with the Guardian articles, there's a blurb at the end asking for your support for the Guardian. I would consider donating to them because of them covering this issue, and I would ask that you consider donating to them as well. Please consider sharing this with all of your family, with your friends. Please get this article out there to other people. There needs to be a reckoning. The Apache do not deserve to have
a religious organization undermine their own religious beliefs. Especially not if that religious organization continues to want that federal money to continue helping them support their own missions to these Apache people. If you like this article, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, and follow me for more. Thank you.